Strange, but true stories. Tales from the light side, the dark side, and the other side. I'm Steve White. The world is truly a strange place. We are offered questions throughout the course of our lifetime that beg us to seek answers as to whether something is true or not. Is what we are seeing an actual representation of truth, or is it a mind game or a trick of the eye that leads us down a false path? The following 6 short stories showcase that we should always keep an open mind to the strange things we witness. 1. Everybody knows about the Amityville Horror, classic American horror novel and movie released in the late 1970s about the haunting of the house located at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York. Prior to November 13, 1974, Amityville lived up to its name as a friendly town. But after 23-year-old Ronald DeFeo shot and killed his mother, father, 2 brothers, and 2 sisters while they slept, the little town on the water became known for horror, and the house as America's most famous haunted house. Prior to the book's release in 1977 and the movie in 1979, paranormal photographer Gene Campbell investigated strange happenings at the Amityville house. He set up his camera on the 2nd floor and exposed several rolls of film, hoping to capture anything out of the ordinary. And with this one photo, he did. The glowing eyes and the head of a little boy who he came to believe was the spirit of little John Matthew DeFeo. John Matthew was 9 when he was murdered in his bed 2 years prior. Could this be his inquisitive face staring at us from beyond the grave? 2. We all have heard strange noises in our house in the middle of the night. Creaks, bumps, scratching perhaps in the walls. And while most can be passed off as nothing out of the ordinary, sometimes there are things that are there that we could never suspect. In 2008 in Japan, a 58-year-old man heard strange noises in his house but didn't think too much about it until he began to notice some of his food missing over a period of months. He installed cameras in his house and transmitted the images to his phone. Soon after, the cameras picked up movement, and he saw on his phone the image of someone in his house. He called the police, who responded to the suspected burglar in his home. When they arrived, however, they found the doors and windows locked. The man met the police a few minutes later and opened up the doors so they could search for whomever was in the house. Upon opening a shelf closet, they found a woman curled up on her side. Her story shocked the man and the police. She had been living in the house for about a year, entering the house one day when she found the door unlocked, and she never left. She had a mattress in the closet and took daily showers. But to the horror of the man living in the house, she lived just a few feet away from where he spent most of his evenings. 3. This creepy photo has been circulating around the internet for a few years. It truly is horrific to look at. But is it true? The story that accompanies the picture says the actual people having their photo taken is the Cooper family from Texas. The smiling faces of the 2 women dressed in 1950s-style clothing and the compliant little boys anxious to get back to playing, unknowingly sitting next to a hanging person from the ceiling. The story goes that the hanging shadow figure was only revealed after the picture was developed. But in reality, it is a hoax. The Museum of Hoaxes, in fact, researched the history of the picture and could only trace the origins back to 2013. A creepy photo for sure, but more a product of Photoshop rather than a visit from beyond the grave. 4. East Tennessee is home to one of the most well-known haunted tunnels. The Sensabaugh Tunnel lures ghosts and paranormal hunters from all over the world. Stories of voices echoing in the tunnel even though nobody is around, car engines cutting off and refusing to restart inside the tunnel, and the figure and cries of a baby, and reports of tiny handprints in the dusty covering of cars have been told throughout the years. The baby is said to be that of a little girl, believed to have belonged to Ed Sensabaugh, who drowned her in the puddling water in the tunnel. People who have walked or driven through the tunnel have reported hearing the cry of a baby and then later noticing the tiny handprints of a child smudged into the grime on their fenders. One local resident recalled, "I've been to this tunnel several times. I've been to both the walk-through and the drive-through. I was told that the walk-through tunnel was the actual Sensible tunnel and that the one that you drive through is called the Click tunnel, both of which I've been told are haunted." And I believe it. One night that stands out more than any night as far as the Sensible tunnel goes is the night I was grabbed by the ankle from something mysterious. I went with a group of friends and wasn't really in the mood to be there, so I was just messing around with everyone, trying to scare them. After a while, they called on and I got bored. The tunnel was full of water, so I took off my shoes and started walking through the water that ran through it. I found a large rock and sat down waiting for everyone else to get bored so we could leave. And the next thing I know, I felt something around my ankle. I screamed and ran out of the water and told everyone something had grabbed me by the ankle. Nobody believed me, though, until I showed them a faint handprint. I don't know who or what it was, and I'm not really sure I want to know. Every time I go to one of the tunnels, something happens, and I've heard a lot of strange things. 5. There may not be a more horrifying ending than being buried alive. In this day and age, any accidental burial, while still living, would be impossible with medical technology and embalming techniques. But in the 1800s, while not a common experience, it did happen. One tragic story happened in Pikeville, Kentucky. Octavia Smith married the prominent local businessman and hotelier James Hatcher. Their marriage produced a son, Jacob. Unfortunately, Jacob did not live very long, dying shortly after he was born. Octavia fell into a deep depression and then suffered an illness that put her in a coma that she could not be awakened from. She was pronounced dead May 2nd, 1891. Soon after she was laid to rest in her grave, other residents began to show symptoms of what Octavia had developed. They had apparently suffered a bite from the tsetse fly, an insect whose bite can induce sleeping sickness. However, these people recovered to full health a few days later. Octavia's family began to worry if something similar had happened to her and secured an emergency exhumation. The casket Octavia had been buried in had not been airtight. She had indeed awoken from her sleep to find herself trapped beneath the ground. In a panic, she had torn the lining on the lid of her coffin. Her nails were bloodied, and her face contorted in terror, scratched in her frenzy to escape from her grave. But by this time, she really was dead. Her body was reburied, but James was never the same. He had a life-size monument to Octavia erected over her grave. In one arm, the statue held a baby representative of Jacob. He built the Hatcher Hotel at such an angle that he could look up to the cemetery at his young wife, and she could symbolically look down on him. Pikeville residents who lived near the Hatcher plot reported hearing the sounds of a kitten crying coming from the area, but the sound stopped when they approached the plot to investigate. Others have said they could hear a woman crying coming from the same area. 6. And while we are on the subject of death and burial, in October 2000, an ancient mummy was being peddled on the black market in Pakistan. The provenance of the mummified body of a woman was said to originate in Quetta, Pakistan, after an earthquake unearthed the body of a princess. Wrapped in traditional Egyptian-style clothing inside a cuneiform inscribed sarcophagus, the body was put on the market for $11 million. Upon initial examination, an Iranian archaeologist said it appeared to date back to 600 BC. The governments of Iran and Pakistan began to argue over the ownership of the mummified remains of the princess, with the Iranian government arguing the inscription on the breastplate of the woman identified her as a daughter of the Persian king Xerxes. There was a thought that maybe she had married an Egyptian and therefore was buried in the traditional Egyptian way. However, the heart and internal organs had been removed, which was not the way burial was conducted in ancient Egypt. The provenance began to fall apart when carbon dating of the sarcophagus revealed the material used was only 250 years old, and a mat below the body was only 5 years old. It was soon discovered that instead of a long-lost Persian princess from 600 BC, she was instead a 25-year-old woman that appeared to have been killed by being run over by a car or truck in 1996. The mummification story was an elaborate hoax used as a cover-up to a murder. An investigation was started, and several arrests in Pakistan followed. In August 2016, an artist put together an exhibition called The Persian Princess, telling the tragic story of how the unidentified woman went from a glorious princess celebrated in the afterlife to the lowly victim of murder in which the public quickly lost interest. This has been another strange but true stories. Have you ever had anything strange happen to you that you just can't quite explain? We would love to hear about it. Send us an email to strangebutTrueStories2@gmail.com. Let us know what you thought of these stories in the comments below, and subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching this video. I'm Steve White. Until next time.